The stories told of a great-grandfather who was part of a military campaign in China send a British man on a journey of discovery. The desire to learn from the destruction and rebirth of a city prompt an international group of academics to establish an organization to preserve and study its history. A young American seeks out and writes about the turbulent past of a city and its renewal. The story of this Chinese city begins in the last years of a declining imperial age. As the high river of northern China flows into the Bohai Sea, dawn breaks peacefully over the Tianjin shipyard. It was founded by Chinese general and diplomat Li Hongzhang in the 1880s. The shipyard's old buildings preserve secrets of Tianjin's turbulent past. Archaeologists excavate a royal temple from the Qing dynasty. Their work will help reveal new insights into the story of how Tianjin became a gateway to China's imperial capital for colonial powers. This is also the story of China's modern history. As they unearth the temple's foundations, archaeologists are stepping into a bygone era. On an autumn day more than 2 centuries ago, a fleet of British ships carrying nearly 600 gifts for the Chinese emperor sails around the Cape of Good Hope and begins the journey across the Indian Ocean. After 10 months at sea, in the spring of 1793, British envoy George Macartney spots the temple of the sea god at Dagu Port in Tianjin. The temple was built by the Qing emperor. It's used by the governor of Jili area to greet the British fleet. All of these events are recorded by a member of the crew.
Almost from the 12th, 13th century, as soon as Westerners began to hear about China, they were absolutely fascinated. It's so far away, it's so different, and they had very little direct contact. So it's not really until the 18th century that we begin to have much more direct contact between, say, the English and the Chinese, with people like Lord Macartney, who comes to Tianjin. He arrives at Tianjin and then travels through Tongzhou to Beijing.
The imperial summer residence at Chengde, north of Peking, is where Emperor Qianlong receives the first diplomatic mission from the West. While presenting the gifts, British envoy George Macartney reveals the purpose of his diplomatic mission. He asks China to open the port of Tianjin and establish trade relations. Emperor Qianlong declines. Macartney's request disturbs the tranquil imperial court. Tianjin is located on the coast near Peking, making it strategically important to the capital. If foreign vessels and warships are allowed to be stationed at this port, they are just a day away from the emperor. In 1817, the emperor's anxiety prompts him to order the construction of 2 defensive batteries at Dagu Port. The construction of these fortifications continues for the next 40 years. The battlements that visitors can see today are a reconstruction of the original. In 1858, Imperial General Singe Rinchen provides 90,000 silver taels to rebuild Dagu Fort. In addition, 6 defensive batteries, 60 artillery pieces, and a dozen 5,000-kilogram cannons are ordered. Dagu will be well prepared to repel an attack from the sea. These seemingly impregnable defenses are designed to ease the emperor's fears. After a 10-hour flight, Phil Kerm arrives in Beijing. It's a very special trip for this Englishman.
Ever since I was very young, I've heard stories of my great-great-grandfather's exploits in China. Here is a picture of him. He's on the right-hand side.
More than 150 years ago, his great-great-grandfather was among the English and French troops who landed at Tianjin. Sergeant Beck arrived at Dagu port during the Second Opium War.
So my great-great-grandfather was here in 1860 with the 67th Regiment of Foot, the South Hampshires. And I want to follow in my family's footsteps across China. That is my ambition.
The history of this conflict is preserved at the Dagu Fort Remains Museum. The relics of battle are displayed before Kerm in their various forms. The familiar stories of his family become connected to the place where they happened, and Kerm is overwhelmed. The place where his great-great-grandfather fought becomes real, and not simply images conjured up by his imagination. 65 years after Macartney's diplomatic mission, 18,000 British and French troops arrive in China on 70 warships. Among them is Sergeant Beck. This time, the ships carry no gifts for the Emperor. They bear more than 1,000 cannons. Where diplomacy has failed, artillery succeeds, and China is forced to open this port to foreigners. On August 21st of 1860, Dagu Port falls. The English and French troops push on, eventually taking Tianjin on the 24th. An English war photographer records the dead Chinese soldiers, as well as the foreign troops sitting among the debris of the battle. They are the earliest photos of Tianjin, a bitter pictorial record of the city in the mid-19th century. The Second Opium War ends in defeat for China, which must now endure the humiliation of signing the Treaty of Tianjin and Convention of Peking. Tianjin opens to the outside world as a trading port under the terms of the Convention of Peking. It is now 67 years after Macartney's visit. Great Britain has waited for almost 7 decades to attain its goal.
It's a very vital communication point between the West and Beijing. And I think they've thought it was frightfully important to develop Tianjin as a British port.
I have a map.
As he visits the Dagu Fort Remains Museum, Kerm donates a map showing the positions of the British forces. It was used by his great-great-grandfather. The cities, forts, roads, and military camps are still clearly marked on the yellowing paper. The museum artifacts collected after the bloody battle and a map showing the positions of foreign troops bear witness to an ambitious colonial expansion by Europeans over 150 years ago. In the Illustrated London News, Britain's triumph is proudly depicted with words and illustrations on the front page. At the same time, official notices posted along the streets of Tianjin read, "Tianjin is open to foreigners. no onlookers. To the local people, the future of their city seems bleak beyond belief. In the 21st century, a young American named Parker Barabal comes to work as a reporter for a Tianjin magazine. He comes to China from Miami and is immediately captivated by the unique glamour of Tianjin.
我刚来天津的时候，我觉得这个城市很有意思。这边有四合院，这边有小洋楼。在五大道，我觉得这个跟我的老家差不多。我很想知道最早来的西方人都做什么。
John Innocent, a story of mission work in North China, contains first-hand accounts of life in Tianjin written by a British missionary. His take on life in the city from another perspective was wonderfully depicted in words. Parker believes the most unusual feelings of those who once lived here can only be relived in a most unusual manner. He assumes the robes of a missionary and comes to the Shancha River estuary, where John Innocent landed. Above him are the same stars and moon. In 1861, 32-year-old John Innocent is among the first batch of missionaries to enter Tianjin following the Anglo-French Allied forces. In the darkness filled with uncertainty following the invasion, Innocent meets Lieutenant Charles George Gordon. The British officer is looking for a priest to pray for his soldiers as they lay dying. Innocent follows Gordon to the camp of the British armed forces outside the city. Before long, a new task is keeping Lieutenant Gordon busy. He has been ordered to help build the British concession. This is to be a piece of Britain wedged into Chinese soil. He begins conducting surveys and drawing up plans for construction. Professor Shang Keqiang has been doing research on the history of the concessions in Tianjin for years.
这一带就是最早的英租界，葛登在天津测量就是在这儿。英国驻天津的领事最后确定的地址，这是489亩。这是天津最好的一块地方，海河岸边非常平直，特别适合于建设码头，便于对天津开展贸易活动。
The French consul had not arrived yet, so the British made a decision on behalf of France. A piece of land beside the British concession was designated as the French concession. Before joining the army, Lieutenant Gordon studied architectural engineering and had a strong desire to reproduce London in Tianjin. He maps out the plan for the city, including dikes, avenues, and 35 building lots.
Gordon designs the British concession, and by that time, the British are quite practiced at designing concessions. They mark out some streets, they work out where the consulate should go, they mark the land out into little lots, and they auction the plots of land to different British companies.
A concession is a territory within a country that is administered by a different country. It operates like a foreign land and enjoys independent administrative power. The United States did not send troops to Tianjin, but makes efforts to secure the best location along the high river. 3 countries take land for concessions on the river's west bank. St. Paul's Cathedral in London is a symbol of the nation. It is a great honor to be buried in the crypts of this magnificent building. Charles George Gordon served Britain on alien soil all his life. He marked out the concessions in Tianjin and helped to suppress the Taiping Rebellion. He would die while serving as Governor General of Sudan. Major General Gordon's final resting place is here. Tianjin becomes the starting point for his rise to military fame. This part of his early career is witnessed by his countryman, John Innocent. The Street of Ancient Culture in Tianjin is a favorite spot for tourists from home and abroad. Parker is trying to understand the appearance of Westerners like himself from the work of a Chinese street artist. These days, the folks in Tianjin are accustomed to seeing people from around the world, but this was not always the case. 150 years ago, the people of Tianjin were terrified and confused, but also curious about foreigners. An early record of their comments on foreigners reveals they were surprised to see that some had dark skin, while many were white and others seemed red. Some had eyes that were green, but others were blue. Did this mean the world looked green or blue to them? Many carried walking sticks, so people in Tianjin wondered if they were afraid of dogs. At the spot where he met Gordon, John Innocent rents a house and settles down. He hands out pamphlets explaining Christianity in the streets and attempts to convert the people. He communicates only in broken Chinese, but eventually manages to convert his first batch of 12 locals. The number implies some kind of coincidence, as Jesus also had 12 disciples. The summer of 1870 brings a plague. There is suspicion about the activities of missionaries who take in poor children. As a crowd gathers outside a church, an angry and belligerent French consul at the governor's office fires a pistol, fatally wounding a civilian. A riot begins, and outraged people burn down the Catholic Church. While the ashes are still cooling, foreign warships arrive at Dagu port, and war seems imminent. Due to his inefficient handling of the Tianjin incident, Governor Zheng Guofan faces wide criticism. Accused of senility, Zheng recommends that his favorite protege, Li Hongzhang, take over Tianjin. This is Li Hongzhang at 47, as seen through the lens of a British photographer, John Thompson. Li is already well established on the local political stage and is ready to take action. In just 20 years or so, Li makes Tianjin the center of the self-strengthening movement. This is a photo of the key members of Li's foreign affairs team. The two men to his left are his sons. The two foreigners behind him are consultants. One is the German-British Gustav von Dietring, known as the actual foreign minister of the Qing dynasty. The other is Konstantin von Hanneken of Germany, Li's military advisor. Li is deeply impressed by 35-year-old Dietrich's calm and decisiveness during negotiations. Li invites him to intervene and negotiate with the colonial powers to help China resolve the crisis. Li also recommends Dietrich become the commissioner of Tianjin Customs and supports his reappointment as the chairman of Tianjin British Municipal Council for 15 years. When photographer John Thompson arrives in Tianjin, there are very few foreigners in the old city district. Residents are shocked by the fire at the Catholic Church and move to the newly improved British concession. Under Dietrich's administration, the British concession undergoes comprehensive improvement. Elm trees and foreign-style houses spring up on both sides of Victoria Road. Foreign firms, banks, consulates, and expatriate residents create hustle and bustle throughout the concession. In the 19th century, the city of Tianjin is a new world for adventurers. People of all backgrounds buy passage on ocean liners and make their way to China. Retired German officer Konstantin von Henneken is among them. Henneken carries Dietrich's recommendation and is enthusiastically received by Li Hongzhang. Li asks his opinion on Dagu Fort. His answer is extraordinarily blunt. He points out that Dagu Fort lacks self-defense capability and is already out of date. His comments could be considered a statement about the entire Qing dynasty, something Li is already aware of and worried about. 1 month later, Henneken receives a letter commissioning him to build batteries for the Northern Army. The German company Krupp receives a large order from China for the purchase of 328 cannons of various calibers. Li Hongzhang believes if the coastlines are protected with advanced German cannons, China need fear no enemy. From the military to foreign affairs, Li is keen on all sorts of reforms. There are astonishing achievements in Tianjin over just 2 decades. It will build Asia's biggest powder mill, Asia's strongest naval fleet, China's first military school, college, telegraph office, and railway, just to name a few. As many as 100 of China's firsts happen in this city. Tongguang resurgence is the expression used to describe these developments in China. The sleeping giant, as Napoleon describes it, is awakening.
Well, the Tianjin area is particularly interesting for China's self-strengthening and development. Tianjin becomes a kind of a focus for reforming administrators.
The eve of the 2013 Spring Festival witnesses Tianjin's biggest spring festival market, the Street of Ancient Culture. New Year's paintings are a must for many people. This type of traditional painting represents a desire for good luck in the coming year. However, one New Year painting from 127 years ago carries a non-traditional theme. The painting depicts an imperial prince and several ministers standing proudly on the deck of a majestic-looking warship. The foreigners beside them display a look of curiosity. This scene is from 1886, as Prince Chun was accompanied by Li Hongzhang and Hanneken on an inspection tour of the coastal defenses. The powerful new artillery battery and newly formed navy win the praise of the foreign onlookers. Prince Chun is overjoyed. As a result, this unusual painting will appear in every household this holiday season. At the Temple of the Sea God, Prince Chun honors the Chinese soldiers killed during the 2 Opium Wars. He firmly believes that China will never again be bullied. In 1922, a fire destroyed the temple. Visitors can only try to imagine the original appearance of the Temple of the Sea God. Archaeologists will provide the only clues. As the site is carefully unearthed, the history of the temple becomes clearer with each discovery. The excavation of every object touches the heart of Wang Keyou. Wang is the current manager of the shipyard, which was built in 1880 by Li Hongzhang. Dagu Shipyard is the birthplace of China's first submarine. An advanced 1-pound breechloader artillery piece was also made here, one that's even better than the German model. In those days, Tianjin was China's largest base for military industry in the north.
这是1880年建厂初期从德国进口的肩板机，这是从英国的道格拉斯进口的船舶专用的设备，能冲眼儿，能拉料，还能剪裁，而且前几年呢，我们还在用。
As the 21st century begins, a wave of large-scale development sweeps through the area around Dagu. Amid the roar of heavy construction equipment, the 130-year-old shipyard becomes a lonely island. To protect the remains of the shipbuilding and armaments industry is one of Wang's most important concerns. He goes around the city telling stories about the place over and over again. He knows that under the yellow sand are 7 old docks. At sunset, Wang can still hear the old siren sounding from the dock. On July 23rd in 1894, the merchant ship Kaohsiung, chartered from Hong Kong's Jardine Matheson Company, leaves the dock of the Dagu shipyard. Its destination is Korea. On board the Kaohsiung is military advisor Hanneken, 1,200 Chinese soldiers, and a good deal of aid and material destined for Korea. As the steamship churns across the Bohai Sea, no one suspects the grim fate that awaits it. Warships of the Japanese Navy will ambush this unarmed merchant vessel and sink it. Only 200 soldiers survive. Hanneken narrowly escapes and swims for 4 to 5 hours before being rescued. The Japanese Navy is able to locate and confront the Kaohsiung. Do they know its course and what it carries? This mystery will perplex historians for decades. Lo Shuwei is a historian and comes to the archives in Tianjin to find clues among the more than 15,000 volumes of unpublished secret files about Tianjin customs.
好，这份往来密函呢，我们看看目录，一共有44件，它包括了李鸿章、丁汝昌、德崔林和盛宣怀往来的密函。这些信的信封的封口的地方都有火漆的铅封，那么它证明这封信在递到本人手中之前是从没有被拆阅过的，而且也证明了这个信的保密程度的密集。
Among them, one letter to Li Hongzhang reveals a clue that may help solve the mystery. The letter says 2 Japanese spies have been arrested in Southeast Asia. Perhaps these 2 spies are involved. In the archives, a document says a Japanese spy masquerading as a Chinese citizen is arrested at a house in Tianjin. Inside the house, they find a list of the numbers and names of officers and soldiers on the Kaohsiung. The details about the ship's voyage are astonishing. Even the quantity of vegetables and other food is known. It would seem to be compelling evidence of espionage. Unfortunately, the Kaohsiung incident is just a prelude to greater bitterness. 5 days later, Japan declares war on China.
天津在甲午战争期间，相当于一个中国的大本营，所有一切军事行动、军队的调动命令，那都是要从李鸿章这儿发出。很有意思的一个现象，就是整个甲午战争，好像是李鸿章他的北洋系和日本一个国家来打，而中国的国防动员没有达到全国动员，甚至当时南方的海军、南洋海军都调不来。
The war sees the destruction of China's elite northern navy. The country is forced to cede territory and pay indemnities. Li Hongzhang's decades of hard work are in vain.
One effect of the Sino-Japanese War was that Japan was able to establish a concession for the first time in the city of Tianjin. In 1895, Japan was given its own territorial space within the city limits.
66 hectares of land in Tianjin is ceded to Japan and becomes the Japanese concession, with the old city to the north and the French concession to the south. In the name of its service in the return of the Liaodong Peninsula, Germany forces the government to allocate an area on the west bank of the Hai River as the German concession. The layout of Tianjin becomes even more complex. The United States Library of Congress houses an impressive collection and upholds a rigorous academic spirit. But an absurd exception exists. This footage is made by Thomas Edison's film studio in 1901. It's part of one of the earliest documentaries in the world. Every frame of this 3-minute documentary depicts the savage bombing of Dagu Fort by European ships. Tianjin, however, is located on a plain, and Dagu Fort seems to have no boundaries. In the film, the fort is surrounded by mountains, and European-style castles tower majestically in the frames. This film could easily represent the earliest reenactment footage in the history of documentaries. What lies behind the absurd documentary is not just a show, but brutal warfare. In 1900, the eight-power Allied forces invade China. Dagu Fort falls again and is completely destroyed. First established in 1817, the fortress witnesses the reign of 5 emperors and is repeatedly destroyed and rebuilt over 83 years. Neither the huge cannons made by Sino-Japanese nor the German Krupp cannons are able to guard the gateway of the Qing dynasty. Learning from the West does not help restrict the West, the sad lesson of the self-strengthening movement. The troops of the 8 powers push on from Dagu Port, sweeping into Tianjin and then on to Peking. Empress Dowager Cixi and Emperor Guangxu flee to Xi'an. In his twilight years, Li Hongzhang faces another humiliation for his country. On the day he signs the Boxer Protocol, the 78-year-old politician, general, and diplomat falls seriously ill. 2 months later, he is on his deathbed. Li's last words are, "How is Tianjin?" So how is Tianjin? To the Chinese, the Boxer Protocol turns it into a desert shared by the Western powers. The city of Tianjin is fragmented once again. Some painful numbers are found in the archives. 360 hectares for Russia, 52 hectares for Italy, 66 hectares for Austria. Even Belgium, not involved in the conflict, obtains 45 hectares of land. Germany declares it will turn its 250 hectares into a German concession. France issues a notice expanding its territory by over 130 hectares. Britain seizes the opportunity to expand by about 250 hectares to the southwest. This area is now known as the 5 Avenues District. This is how the concessions of 9 foreign powers come into being in Tianjin. In the 19th century, American and European colonies are spreading throughout Asia, Africa, and Latin America. But a city with concessions for 9 foreign countries within cannot be found anywhere else in the world. The total area of concessions in Tianjin exceeds 1,500 hectares, 10 times larger than the old city area. The water thoroughfares on both sides of the High River are all taken by the big powers. Tianjin is a jewel in the eyes that covet the wealth of China. A period of great humiliation for China is recorded in those images tourists send home from trips abroad. The postcard.
这是老西开教堂，老西开教堂啊，还特别的少明信片。对，这种片儿都是有2种版式，一个棕色的，一个蓝色的。它这个片儿我没见过还。
For years, Zhao Jianshang has been collecting old postcards of Tianjin. The old city walls, racecourse, and camps shown on the 6,000 or so postcards are a window into those old times. These postcards now show people an important part of Tianjin's history.
这是英租界的葛登堂，是英国的工部局，因为地震，这个已经都没了。这个现在的建筑都是新盖的。当初呢，这个建筑盖的时候，是在整个租界当中是最宏伟的了，也是最早的建筑了。
This building on the postcard is the first city hall built in any of China's trading ports. Dietrich names it Gordon Hall in honor of the British lieutenant who laid out the British concession. Throughout the period, there was a collision and a fusion of cultures. Gordon, Innocent, Dietrich, Hanneken, and countless other Westerners leave one mark after another on the city. The changes Europeans bring to the fate of Tianjin and the impact of the 9 concessions on the city are the most tempting questions and vast subjects of study for international historians. In 2008, an academic organization named Tianjin Under 9 Flags is established in Britain.
We chose the project because Tianjin is the only city with so many different concessions. We wanted to understand the impact of foreign concessions on a Chinese city.
Et sur les concessions à Tianjin, il y avait des villas de style italien très jolies, de style suisse, de style allemand, de style français, de style anglais avec des petits clochetons, et chacun avait de l'imagination, et c'était la variété qui plaisait.
Actually, studying Tianjin can tell us more about Chinese history more generally.
Seen from the sky above Tianjin, the 5 Avenues district is like a beautiful red flower among all the green. It is to Tianjin as Notting Hill is to London, and the River Gauche to Paris.
嘛叫五大道呢？五大道的地方，一共是纵横23条马路，1.4平方公里的土地。原来是历史上是英租界的一部分，实际这个地方呢，是一个高档住宅区。这地方呢，名人特别多。这里边有御工，是吧？北洋御工和清朝遗老遗少，美国第31届总统胡佛在天津住了6年，美国国务卿马歇尔，美国的5星级将军、4星将军麦克鲁、鲍瑞德、史迪威都住过。而且这个地方呢，是中国的名人特别多。
Jin Pengyu is a volunteer guide in the 5 Avenues district. For decades, he's been visiting every old house in the area. The stories about them deeply affect him. He himself was born and brought up here. His family used to be well known in Tianjin. The young man and woman in this wedding photo are his parents. These Spanish-style buildings used to belong to Jin's family. In the 1920s, with the large-scale development of the British concession, this district becomes an upscale area. The 1,000 or more European-style buildings and the residences of more than 100 historic figures form a unique World's Architecture Expo. Here, visitors often feel as if they have walked into an English village. The 5 Avenues district is like a Rubik's Cube developed in time and space, reflecting the changes of a nation over the course of a century. Phil Kerm's journey through China comes to an end. He deeply regrets that a member of his family helped plunder Peking's old summer palace. His visit gives new meaning to the stories passed down from generation to generation in his family. Parker Barabal types the last punctuation mark. Beyond this article titled "The First Visit and Reunion" are more secrets about the city to be discovered by others in the future. These old postcards have been collected and published by Zhao Jianchang. They are an invaluable record of the history of this city. Wang Keyou will see his efforts rewarded. In 2013, Dagu Shipyard is honored as one of China's key cultural relics and placed under national protection. The old shipyard director sees his dream fulfilled. Jing Pengyu continues to spend his days telling people about the past and present of Tianjin. Those past events never fade, nor do old dreams that continue to live on. A desire to build a new and golden age. They achieve honors and meet humiliating disgrace. Oaths to share success and failure end with swords unsheathed. Old age reunites them along the high river in Tianjin. Descendants of these extraordinary men now lead ordinary lives in this city. Witness the rise and fall of the northern government.